I want to say a few things about the book, and I'm thinking of this evening as the first half as from India to Palestine, and since all successful relationships must be reciprocal, the second half of the evening will be from Palestine to India, and that is, I think, what we should be left with. When some of us, I want to talk about the making of the book. The making of this book began with two little memories. When some of us from the Solidarity Committee and in CACB got together and said, let's do this book, many of us recalled a time when there were a lot of Palestinian students in India. That was one memory. The other memory had to do with our passports. I suppose it reveals our age, the contributors in this volume, but I certainly remember my first passport, which I got at the age of 12, and on one separate page there was a blue stamp which said, "Not valid for travel to South Africa and Israel." And it was through the Indian government that I learnt as a 12-year-old that there is something fundamentally wrong with these two places, South Africa and Israel. In fact, that was my introduction to these two places. So, on the one hand, memories such as these, and on the other hand, what we see in India today. So, it was the stark contrast which was the starting point of the book, and the idea of change. What changed? And that is where we began. We got a range of contributors, academics, writers, activists, and as the essays started coming in, we began to get pieces of this puzzle, this change that we were trying to examine. I wrote not only on my own visit to Palestine and what everyday occupation looks like again, but also the idea of revisiting Indian solidarity and what it might mean. And we have a wonderful introduction by Raja Shahade, who you heard. Those are the essays, but I want to say that there were certain central threads that emerged in this variety of perspectives, variety of approaches, poets, economists, political scientists. One was the historical thread, both in West Asia as well as in India. In West Asia, the fragmentation that was caused by the colonial powers of the day, and in India, the solidarity, I won't use the word solidarity, the view of Palestine and therefore the view of Israel that grew out of the freedom movement and later the non-aligned movement's desire to decolonize by pursuing independent policies. So that is a historical thread. And then three other threads, more recent ones. One, of course, is the closer ties. We've spoken of the military ties. There are commercial ties, academic ties, cultural ties, but at the heart, the military ties. And the military ties as linked with strategic relations. The third point is the current situation in Palestine. And several of our contributors who have been to Palestine spoke of this, not only about the West Bank and Gaza, but within Israel, about the layers of erasure that exist over and above the layers of discrimination, the layers of violence. And finally, of course, the parallel threads of solidarity. Why solidarity? And there, I think, the central point that emerged was that for India to express solidarity with Palestine is actually for India to express solidarity with a certain notion we had of what India is all about. And that is, if you like, simplistically put, the why. And the how, of course, is even harder. But that, again, some of the suggestions made are, of course, pressurizing not only academic and cultural institutions in India and media, industry, and so on to eschew business as usual with Israel, but most of all to pressure the Indian government to put an end to military ties. One of the reasons I didn't read the passages about what all of us Indians who'd been to Palestine saw and heard, all of us who've never seen even colonial India, leave alone this particular form that exists in Palestine and Israel. I didn't read that because we are actually going to have the benefit of hearing Nadera talk about Palestine. Nadera, please join me. She is going to talk about Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, of course, is always of profound symbolic value. And so the strategies evolved to exercise this logic of elimination is even sharper.
Thank you very much, Gita. I'm honored and delighted to be here. Delighted to bring to you kind of an example of what this iron fist that we were talking about and the way Palestinians are treated and are living their daily life, but while looking and focusing more on occupied East Jerusalem. So my aim is to try to show the different policies and the way the Israeli settler colonial policy and politics is inscribed on the lives and on the bodies of Palestinians. So my talk would be more on the human side, because usually when we discuss, for example, cases of demolitions and housing demolitions, so we talk about it and we say, well, was it legally built? Israelis demolished a house, oh, it's very sad, but the question is, what does it make? What does it mean to a family? And how does it affect the family? And demolitions, for example, in East Jerusalem, over 15,000 homes were demolished. And we're talking about thousands of families being displaced. And when I looked in my research at the effect of the Israeli policy, I learned that there is a demolition before the demolition, and a demolition during the demolition, and a demolition after the demolition. The demolition before is all those bureaucracies that the Palestinian family needs to go and try to address and look at and understand. Everything is in Hebrew. And according to international organizations, because the main argument by the Israelis is that Palestinians are building with no permits. Now, number one, it's occupied territories. We don't need permits from the occupier. But number two, 94% of those requests for permits by the Palestinians are denied. But when I looked at the demolition before the demolition, is living every day wondering what would happen to a family. And women, for example, because usually the human story does kind of skip the you woman story, is that they fear so much the demolition because demolition is usually fast. They come in 20 minutes. They come at 5 or 4 a.m. They get the kids out of the house and the bulldozer bulldozes the house. So, and the family needs to collect their belongings, their birth certificates, whatever. I don't know what, if I would ask you to leave your house in 20 minutes, what would you take from the house? So think about this trauma. Then think about the fact that parents are so confused to the degree that in one case when I asked little Rahaf, was 3 years old. And we went as a group, tried to support the family. Can you draw your family after the demolition? She drew her grandfather, who was bleeding when the Israeli came. He was fighting back. Her mom, her brother, and sister. And I asked first time, Rahaf, is this your family? She said, yes, this is my mom, this is my grandfather, my grandmother, and my brother and sister. And I said, this is all your family? She said, well, you mean Abui, my father? I said, oh, your father. She said, well, I didn't ask him to be my father. ما قلتلوش يكون أبوي. Now, look at this 3-year-old kid taking the license of parent, of a father from the father, because he was smoking when they were demolishing the house. He did not defend. He did not know. We know that people react in different manner. This man was so traumatized to see his house demolished. He was standing there and smoking his cigarette with so much anger. And what Rahaf saw in her father is a big failure, because he is not my father. He's not even part of this family portrait that I'm drawing. This is the effect of Israeli demolition policies. So I guess that one of the things that I wanted to bring to the forefront tonight is to remember the human story, to remember the woman story, to remember the little kids that are being really affected by this policy of demolition, this policy of controlling the families, because the moment your house is demolished, try to find a job afterward. That's another issue. So, you know, the entanglement of the different aspects, the very detailed elements of the livelihood, of the everydayness of Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem are deeply affected by the policies, by the bureaucracies, and by the ideology, and the Zionist ideology that is built on a clear settler colonial policies. And it's not the event itself of demolishing this house, but it's this structure. And it is very structural, because no matter where you go to try to get a permit, you go to try to get a permit to pass and reach your family, you try to go to get medical insurance, or go to find a job, or to visit a family, or to participate in a funeral. It's all, and even to bury your beloved one, it's all affected, controlled, and surveilled by the Israeli power. Surveillance, for example. Come and visit me in the old city and see. The security devices are all over the area. Our ability to move, our ability to reach places is so controlled. You were talking and reading, Githa, about the light festival. This light festival changed all my life in the old city, because they not only, the moment they have this light festival, that means that for a week cannot reach my house in the old city, because my Jewish neighbors could get a permit to get while I could never get it. So I need always to find a friend to stay at her place until 12, and then midnight, and only then reach my house in the old city, because otherwise, so these all sorts of things and performativity of power, of we're here and it's our feast and so on, is changing our entire life, is controlling our life in occupied East Jerusalem. And what I wanted to show you, some statistics and some maps, just to see what goes on. One of the things that we could see, and I'm writing about lately, is the issue of child arrest. I believe, although statistically it's not proven, but statistics is usually borrowed from the Israeli sources, our sources are showing that there is an increase according to DCI Palestine, Defense for Children International Palestine, but lately we have a high rate of child arrest, and I'm talking about children of the age of 12 and 11, and the last case was with a court order going to a house in the middle of the night of a child who was 4 years old, and that is documented. And if you can, of course, the checkpoints and the passage. This is the old city of Jerusalem beside the mosque. Even there, as you see, they try to protect themselves from us. And I must state that we don't know who is what. I mean, who is the police, who is the military, and who is the other kind of security that are not even with the dress code. But let's look at some demography. One of the things that we see, as we were talking about Israel's policy towards Palestinians, the demographic, looking at us as a demographic threat, and again, it's kind of embedded in their planning. The plan is to have in occupied East Jerusalem to have 70% Jews and 30% Arabs, according to what we have today, actual statistics. Palestinians are 38%, and this is according to the Israeli Civil Rights Association, the Association for Civil Rights. The Judaization of the space, which means, trying to plant settlers in, and I mean like they started at the beginning with taking big portions of land. Today in the old city, it's room by room. I mean, literally, if you go and you see where those settlers are living, in one place where you have a Palestinian family and a Palestinian family, and you see a settler's family in the middle of the area, whereby again, all the security devices are securing them from us, from the profane other. Judaization. You see it in the wall, and 55,000 Palestinians were thrown totally outside occupied East Jerusalem due to the wall. We see 130,000 affected by it, and we see that 3.7 million separated. If we go on and we see the checkpoint, which is another way of Judaizing the space, and we have 16 checkpoints around occupied East Jerusalem. And if you look at the permit system, which is another story, and again, maybe I should share with you the story of a young man who was born in Jerusalem and known to us, to my family, and went to study engineering in the West, came back, he learned that his citizenship, his residency was revoked, and they took his Jerusalem ID, and he ended up applying for permit every year, and while his family had Jerusalemite IDs. Now, after a couple of years, he had cancer, and he lived literally after the checkpoint. Of course, checkpoints were built by the Israelis. And he used to go for chemotherapy in Maqasid Hospital in Jerusalem and go back to his house, which is past the checkpoint. One day he had the chemotherapy session. 4 hours after he reached his house, he passed away. And in Islam, the best thing you do is burying your beloved one as fast as possible. Yeah? And when they tried to bring him back to Jerusalem to bury him in the family barrier in Shara Salah ad-Din, the soldiers said that his permit was expired, which means he was allowed to pass as a living man, but he cannot go back to Jerusalem as a dead body. And the fascinating thing is how they read and write the living power of the Palestinian dead body. Even as a dead body, it was impossible to bring him back and to bury him in the family barrier. This is only one of the day-to-day stories that I'm sharing with you. The land confiscation is another way of Judaizing, and the housing demolitions is another way of Judaizing. Now, just look at this map. Look at the land zoning in occupied East Jerusalem. As you see, 13% of the land that was occupied in 1967 is zoned for Palestinian constructions. The rest, 30%, is unplanned area, and I assure you, if I come next time to India, it would be planned for Israeli Jewish settlements. 22% is green areas, this one you could add it also to the 30%, and 35% was expropriated for Israeli settlements that I will be showing very soon in a map. Housing demolition permits, as I said, 94% were rejected. 93,000 at risk of displacement nowadays, especially, the last couple of weeks we had really very bad demolitions, very, very bad demolitions, including 2 houses that were demolished by mistake. I don't know what does it mean, but this is how they did it in Walaji and in other places. Sociocide, so in addition to the spatial side and in addition to the geopolitical element, the effect and the way they change and engineer society. we have, and this is something that let me stop on it a little bit. I was looking at the Israeli National Child Association that usually they publish their report every year, and they wrote that a large number of undocumented kids there are a large number of the undocumented kids in Israel. 77% of those undocumented kids are in East Jerusalem. We're talking about 155,000 children who has no birth certificates, which means if they will die tomorrow, as if they never existed. Israel is refusing, and today is refusing to issue birth certificates for those kids because their parents are one with a residency status, the other is not, which is our situation in occupied East Jerusalem. We're here talking about also a new proposed law that is requiring that issue would stop issuing birth certificates to foreigners, and those foreigners are Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and of course the foreigners that are coming from other places, but mostly another demographic war to displace, to evict, and to kick out, to uproot Palestinians. Again, the number of the child arrests, according to the Israeli Association for Civil Rights in Israel, and the criminal records that were open. We can't find now data. The only thing that I could tell you from my latest work is that there are less arrests, but, and this is why numbers are lying, because numbers could tell a story, but could tell a specific story. There are lots of cases of kidnapping for 3-4 hours of children of 9 years old, 10 years old. It happens in Aisawiyi, Silwan, and Ras Al Amud. They beat them, they hit them, they scare them, and they return them back to their families. Our problem is that we cannot go against those soldiers that are kidnapping kids legally, because the families are so afraid to file a complaint, and they're saying to us, listen, the child is back home, we want to live, we won't find a job if we will file a complaint. So we're managing to talk to them face to face, we're managing to collect the cases, but we cannot go to court, which is also, not that I believe in the Israeli court system, because, hey, colonialism was done legally, and in Israel, their laws are definitely serving their settler colonial project. Bureaucracy, which is one of the bureaucracy of occupation is fascinating. And again, you see it in checkpoints, you see it in getting birth certificates, you see it in getting death certificates, because even burying a beloved one is a problem, because we need a death certificate certified by an Israeli doctor, or a doctor that has an Israeli certificate, in order to go to the Ministry of Health, which is in the Israeli side, to get an approval to bury. So those two things, the death certificate and the barrier, is another thing that is affected by East Jerusalem. Let me show you the budget allocation. This is the statistics based on the Israeli municipality, and it's published by the Alternative Information Center and by B'Tselem. The budget allocation for the West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. So you see, for example, the public parks, you see 95.5 West Jerusalem and 4.5 East Jerusalem. If you look at playground, 99% West Jerusalem, 1% East Jerusalem. Libraries, and so on. Sidewalks and swimming pools. So when you look at what is going on in both sides, you see that even the allocation of resources are really all in the west side, mostly in the west side. Yet, according to the new mayor of Jerusalem, 38% of the budget of the municipality of Jerusalem comes from fines from East Jerusalem. So they're taking fines, and maybe I need to mention one thing, that even the bulldozer that are bulldozing our houses, we should pay for it, and the police that are coming and escorting, because they come, they eat, they sit, and it's 77,000 shekels, which is around $20,000 and even more. So keep that in mind then, and this is why, according to the statistics today, by ICAD, which is the Israeli Committee Against Housing Demolition, we see a decline in the number of houses that are demolished. Yet, please keep in mind that the families are so afraid that the bulldozers will come and demolish their houses that the self-demolition are in an increase, which means the families are demolishing their own houses in their hands so as to make sure that the door that they bought and the handle that they bought, they could sell it and not lose it and not pay the money for the Israeli bulldozers. So those little details are so important. Now, poverty rate, as you could see, that the poverty rate among Palestinians are higher, and the financial burdens, like here, Palestinian men 40% poverty rate, 85% of Palestinian women unemployment, which is very, very high, and 3.5 Jewish kids are under the poverty line, while Palestinians, we're talking about 84.1 under the poverty line. The issue of settlers' attacks is really in an increase. Again, some of it is documented, the other is not documented. We have this group of price tags that are price tagging, controlling, writing graffitis, Arabs out, Palestinians out, and death to the Arabs, Muhammad is a pig, and so on. And this kind of property damage is high, and casualty, the fights in the old city among settlers and our kids are very high. Now, I must state here that some of those issues are not documented for one reason. For example, where I live, there is a school for girls, and girls of 7 and 8 years old needs to walk. It's a 5 minutes walk. Old city, usually you walk to schools. My own daughters walk to school, and one of the things that happened lately is that those settlers are stopping because they have guns and they are securing the other settlers in the old city. They stop little girls and they ask them to, for example, jump on one leg 10 times and then go to school, or hit themselves 7 times and then go to school. Now, maybe when I went to complain, the police asked me, are there any casualties? Now, I don't know what to answer, but it's very clear that to them there are no casualties. To me, the fact that they're disrupting the life and they're adding fear and terror to little girls 7 and 8 years old while they're on their way to school is something that cannot be denied. And this is the old city, and I apologize that the names are in Arabic, but I will try to translate it. So the green part is the 72 kilometers that were confiscated, and the blue part is West Jerusalem. So if you look at the area, and this is the area, again, remember, the old city is the red, is the small piece, the square. Now, the red parts are areas that were confiscated in East Jerusalem. The green are the green areas that we cannot live or build on it. And the red ones are settlements in the area that was confiscated, including, for those of you who know the area, Ramat Eshkol and the French Hills and so on. Now, in addition, they started this line of roads, and of course, all the roads should pass through our houses and our land, which is another thing that is fascinating. And then they built the separation wall that also separated and confiscated other part of Jerusalem. Now, if you look at it again, you look at the west side, you look at the east side, and in the middle, the old city. The east side was the metropolitan of Jerusalem, was enlarged to include additional settlements. All the settlements that you see, the additional parts were added to Jerusalem. Now the brown parts are little Palestinian neighborhoods that are part of East Jerusalem. Today, according to the Israeli map, they were thrown out of East Jerusalem, which means part of our, like for example, in Sur Baher, in the middle of Sur Baher, which is a neighborhood, the barrier is on one side, and the entire area, the village, was thrown out of Jerusalem, so people cannot even access the barrier. same with schools and so on. What is left are the yellowish kind of orangey part. That is another thing. And then they, of course, they enlarged the area. So you see the blue parts that are the Israeli settlements that were built after 1967, and with time they added this part which is Mada Adumim here, another area that was added to make the Jewishness, to Judaize the area and to show that they are more controlling. Now this is the old city of Jerusalem. And this is the old city of Jerusalem, and just see different things. I will try to focus on surveillance number 1, because this control over the area, demolition number 2, and the separatism number 3. Now this is where the Jewish quarter, which means all that area was demolished in 1967. Part of it was emptied by the Jordanians before the Israelis occupied it, and the other part, which is Habt al-Magharbi, the Moroccan side, was demolished totally. The entire areas were demolished. Now, in addition to this, all the new red small spots are new settlements filled with settlers inside. Of course, they opened this road in black, which is called the Cardo, the main road that is coming. The entrance, the purple parts are parts that are controlled by Israel, and this big part there, the gray part, is under the threat of being demolished, which is the Burj al-Laqlaq, and an area that is now, most of it is under the threat of being demolished. We don't know when they will demolish it. So what we see in the old city of Jerusalem is, and this is like a picture that is outside the old city, you see that there is this entire red part, which is outside the wall of the old city, is being confiscated. So what you see all the time is those requests for us to get out of the area, to be, this is a group of settlers that are working very hard to tell us, if we did not get the message that we should be out, they're saying it in clear, Arabs out of Jerusalem, no room for all of us. And this is the group of settlers called Price Tag, again saying Arab leave the building. And this is the last election in Jerusalem, and you see how we are not only asked to be out, but we should be thrown like trash out. So this is the wasted thing. This is the part of Haaretz newspaper that I wanted to share with you. Israel stopped issuing birth certificates to children of foreigners. So my argument in looking at the settler colonial policy of Israel in occupied East Jerusalem is that we need to look at so many layers. We need to look at the geography. We need to look at the bureaucracy. We need to look at the way the laws are used by them, but we also, and this is the most important thing, we need to look at the way it's affecting the everyday life. It's affecting the lives of children, it's affecting the lives of women that are pregnant, that are not sure whether they will reach the hospital or not, and how, whether their babies will be granted a birth certificate or not, whether to stay and handle the atrocities of the settlers around the different areas, or whether their kids will be arrested. So there are so many issues that are related to Jerusalem that reminds us of what happened to Palestine, because in Palestine this is all what we have seen. It's displacement, it's uprooting, and it's a continuous Nakba that is really affecting the everyday life and trapping Palestinian in a trap whereby the criminality of the state is causing this sense of unjust and unfair life, a life that is turning Palestinians into wasted, unimportant, otherized people while giving all the power to the Israeli state. And being here and sharing with you the context of Jerusalem, of occupied East Jerusalem, and while I see it just from the window of my house, I went to show you where I live just to tell you that this is what I see every single day. And those little kids of the settlers that are controlling our kids and scaring them and those little hardships that we're facing might be considered an event, but settler colonialism is not an event. It's a structure that is working so hard to turn us into exile at home. And I hope that the continued discussion on India and Palestine would allow us to rethink how we could come back from India that is looking at the anti-terrorism and failing to look at the situation of the Palestinians, to going back into reading Palestine from a settler colonial perspective. Thank you.